Senator Deakin, Ontario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in support of the motion to strike a special committee on systemic racism. I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Senator Bernard for encouraging us to undertake this important initiative, and Senator Lankin for introducing the motion on her behalf. I also wish to thank every one of you who have spoken on the matter of racism this last week. Your words were deeply impactful and have inspired me to share my voice this evening. When we are vulnerable, when we can share part of our narratives, that is when we can do great work together. Every story, every experience was an eye-opener. As I listened, though, I also felt frustration. The debate was important, it was educational, but I think we can all agree we need to see this action. This special committee would be one step toward that. There is no question that systemic racism exists in Canada, in our economy, in our prisons, in our healthcare, in our schools and learning institutions. We know this, but why are we still here? As has happened all too often, we've had a light shone on us and we are again uncomfortable with what we see, but we need to feel uncomfortable. I have to admit that as a white Canadian, I am somewhat uncomfortable speaking today. Like many of us who have never had to worry about the color of our skin, I wonder what it is that I can add to the national discussion and action we must have. I cannot demonstrate the pain felt by racialized Canadians. In my past, I've had glimpses of what it feels like to be invisible, to be targeted, to understand discrimination as it relates to my gender, but not race. I don't know what that deeply feels like. When I first heard the term white privilege, I also felt a little uncomfortable. It was hard for me to accept that by virtue of my race, I had advantages over others where I hadn't seen them before. Like all of you, we know the hours we've put in to get to where we need to go. We know what we've sacrificed. We know the bumps in the road that we've encountered and even tragedies along the way. White privilege is therefore a term that is difficult to hear. It's upsetting to be racialized, to be identified as white, because quite frankly, I'm not used to it. And therein lies some of the privilege, to be completely unfamiliar, being viewed through the lens of racialization or dealing with the burdens that come with it. It is that realization, accepting that white privilege exists and coming to terms with it, that is why these conversations are so important and why we all need to keep them going and strong. Moreover, it was hard for me to accept that by virtue of who I am, but what I look like, I have likely unwittingly contributed to a system that is inherently tilted against my friends and colleagues. This is even harder at times to accept as a former education superintendent, where we did our best to implement policies to combat conscious and unconscious racial bias. We hired equity and inclusion officers and advocated for the needs of Black, Indigenous and Asian students. We worked with authors and book publishers to ensure these issues were included in the materials used by our young students. We worked closely with all levels of community services to serve these students the best we knew how. But while these and other approaches are needed and useful, it's clear to me now that we were merely treating the symptoms of an underlying system that was and is still broken. I myself have been called a racist, and it was both a deeply troubling and an incredibly enlightening experience. It came after years of working with high school students, their families, community partners, leading restorative justice circles to deal with conflict, racism, drugs, and violent incidents. I thought I'd seen most of it. I became a principal of an elementary school in the first month after witnessing a fight resulting in injuries between some grade 3 boys. I met their parents. As I met with a third student and his father, before I could start the conversation, the father picked up his son, looked me straight in the eye and said, "This fight never happened. You're a racist." He removed his son and walked out. It was shocking, but also a very, very informing moment for me. Not me, I thought. I'm not racist. In time, I got to know this family well. I came to realize the frustration they felt, dealing day in and day out with varying degrees of systemic racism. And as a principal of their school, I was representing the system. For so long, I was keeping a lookout for overt racist acts, but those problems run so much deeper than that, and they still do today. If you want to be an ally, If you want to confront systemic racism, simply not being a racist is not good enough. If we go about our work knowing these things, knowing that the deck is stacked against such a large swath of Canadians, but doing nothing to try to change that, we are complicit in its perpetuation. This and other experiences are part of my narrative. They've taught me many things, including the importance of empathy, listening while moving to common ground, and most importantly, that we must meet people where they are. I learned through working with our Indigenous populations that consulting with them, supporting and understanding must be done in their communities, on their land, in their homes, where we experience their lives and traditions before we can try to improve what we think is change. This proposed special committee can be a vehicle for that as we set out to create that change. Colleagues, when I came into this chamber, it was with a few admittedly broad goals in mind to help make our country better, healthier, more hopeful, and more connected. To do that, we have to confront the reality that Canada has an urgent racist problem, and we need to put in the work to begin to dismantle a system that has seen racialized Canadians be very disadvantaged. This will not happen overnight, of course, and it will take constant vigilance to see that any successes from this project remain. It can, however, not go one more generation. It just cannot. We have to start doing the work now and seize this moment, this momentum, to put in motion reforms that won't peter out when the next event happens, when society gets distracted by something else. We need to look at the changing fundamental structures, seeing if undertakings like a universal basic income can somehow contribute to leveling things, even slightly, revisiting mandatory minimum penalties or criminal record reform as potential, possible avenues of change. We need to listen to the work of groups in this chamber, like the Parliamentary Black Caucus and the Indigenous Senators Working Group. We need to strike a special committee to keep this conversation and action moving. The worst result of all of this is if we take our eye off the ball for 1 second, for one day. If we come to this chamber sometime down the road to deliver platitudes and words when tragedy yet again shines a light on systemic racism in this country. This is the way to do our longer-term work. In hearing many of you speak these last few days, I trust and deeply hope this cannot and will not be the case. And I look forward to giving everything I have to putting in the work needed, and it's in the work, with all of you to help create the change that is needed. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.